I don't know if it'll make any change, but I figure it's time for me to start playing ball.
Tonight, we are the greatest hockey team in the world.
You play ball like a girl!
Hey everyone, welcome back. Expanding the Zone. I'm Shayne Combs, SVCSportsZone.com, here once again this week with my brother Matt. And I know the last couple of weeks, I really appreciate the feedback. I know what was it there, 2-3 weeks ago, we talked about why coaches quit, and we've had a follow-up here talking about some of the stress and organization of coaches. I've had a lot of nice conversations, Matt, with coaches of all ages, people appreciating the show, people adding to the show. That's what makes this so cool is the chance to follow up and have those types of discussions. I know a lot of people are catching up 2-3 weeks back, so it's neat how the feedback covers over a month of shows, and that's fine. That's why it's here on our YouTube channel, SVC Sports Zone Shayne. And of course, if you're out there on the podcast, wherever you get those, your podcast app, if you subscribe to us, you'll have them there to kind of listen at your convenience. I know I like to do that with a lot of the podcasts where I get busy and then I'll go through a week where I'll catch up with 2 or 3. So Matt, on that note, it brings us to show 27 tonight. We're taking sports leadership to the big screen. And, kind of what I mean by that is a little bit of a fun show. We'll tie it in with some seriousness where we're going to take our favorite sports movies and we're going to tie it into coaching and leadership and so forth. Obviously, we're going to have a little fun with it. I know as a middle school student, I always enjoyed these types of things. And then as a middle school teacher in language arts, I'll try to tie them in some motivational pieces and some different things to kind of give us some writing topics, and kids seem to really enjoy them. And so it just made sense as I get into my adult life as a teacher and a coach. Some of my favorite readings will be, books from coaches or sports stories, or, where people come from and how they get to the level of success, and not just even sports, but just leadership in general. So I guess I know we have a long agenda. I don't want to take too long here in the introduction, but I want to give you a chance as I welcome you to the show, just to talk, motivation, leadership, entertainment, all tied into one when it comes to sports movies for you.
It's going to be kind of a loose show compared to some that we do, but we'll try to tie in some leadership topics with it. But I think we're going to have a little fun tonight. Talk a little bit of movies, and specifically sports movies or motivational movies or whatever. But it ought to be fun. I mean, it's fun sometimes. My friends and I over the years have debated, like, what's the best movie in this category? What, you kick around things like that sometimes. And it's funny when you look at some of these movies, some of them do bring up topics that we've discussed in this podcast in terms of leadership. And some of it's, more just for fun, but it'll be a little different, like I said, but maybe a little welcome break from the seriousness tonight, and just have a little fun with it.
Well, I think the first thing we better do is set some boundaries here, okay? Because sports can get a little loose in definition. I know in preparation for the show, I've joked with a lot of people, from the Karate Kid to collar of money with shooting pool and billiards there, and then gosh, it's stretched all. I guess the first thing I would ask you is where do you draw a line in definition of what is a sport? I mean, we joke today at school, if it's on ESPN, is it a sport?
Oh, look at the definition of a sport. The answer to that is no, because, I looked up the definition of sport today, and it basically said something that requires an activity that requires some level of physical exertion and skill.
No wonder my playing days are over.
Yeah, almost every definition said, there has to be some level of competition, but then it also said every definition that you find talks about some level of physical skill. So you get into some of the things that you see. I mean, Is poker a sport, right? I mean, that's on ESPN.
Rounders, good movie. Yeah.
Rounders. That I know that is a great movie. Whether it's a sports movie or not, that's a whole different subject. You'll get things like esports. That's the huge thing. In all honesty, that's coming on the scene right now. I mean, high schools there are high schools starting esports.
I know.
There are leagues. I get emails as an athletic director from leagues saying, if you'd like to join this. And I'll be honest with you, I've had kids. I'm telling you right now, if I started esports tomorrow, it would be the most played sport at Benton County High School.
You probably have to make cuts.
I'm telling you right now.
Tryouts, make cuts.
I mean, yeah, I don't know exactly how it works. Like whether you have like a starting Fortnite team or you got a JV. I don't know, but in all honesty, I mean, schools that as long as a school can find an advisor, they can jump in esports leagues right now.
Right.
So, and let's face it, I don't know if you've ever seen this. The only reason I've seen it is because I've got a son who's into this stuff. But like, have you ever seen like they've sold out like the Staples Center to watch video games?
Well, they put it like I said, they put it on ESPN and people watch them play. Yeah.
Oh yeah, like 20,000 people packed the arena to watch this tournament, this video game battle. So here's one spelling bee. Spelling bees on ESPN all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, is that a sport? I mean, and listen, I love a good spelling bee. I'll tell you this. I still am upset that I finished second at Possum Middle School back in about the second grade in a spelling bee. And if that Martha girl's watching, I should get a rematch. And Martha, you have no life if you're watching us. But no, I mean, spelling bee. Those kids are super talented, but is it a sport, right? It's on ESPN. Is it a sport? So, yeah. What
about cornhole back here behind me, here in the room? I got my Cincinnati Reds cornhole board. That's exertion.
I tell you what, we were so desperate for sports during, the original COVID shutdown. I can remember sitting up one night watching the cornhole championships on ESPN. So
they were masked up, ready to go. They were.
Oh yeah, they didn't let it slow them down at all. You get in this debate a lot. In all honesty, you get the debate. And I'm sure I'm gonna touch a nerve here with some people. Cheerleading at the high school level, right?
Oh, the movie Bring It On.
Well, yeah, there's a movie.
We had this discussion at school today, and I started to make a comment, and I know people know me well enough. My one buddy's like, Shayne, easy. So I stopped. Yeah. He saved me. But yeah, Bring It On. It's a good
I'm
sports
just impressed
movie.
that I'm impressed that you've watched Bring It On probably like 3 times. No, but in all honesty, I mean, you look at cheerleading at the high school level, it isn't really policed by the Ohio High School Athletic Association. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yet it's mentioned by the Ohio Athletic Association in terms of, sports physicals and, but it's really not by rule policed by them. Mm-hmm. Is it a sport? Isn't it a sport? Is it just an activity?
Well, remember when we were growing up, how heavy the competitions were in the area. It seems like now,
and
insurance and a lot of different things goes. A lot of the competition now comes away from the school, doesn't it? More in a travel situation.
Yeah, I mean there are squads that go compete now. Obviously, a lot of that's been shut down here recently with the pandemic. Mm-hmm. But on normal years, there are squads that go and compete, some of them quite a few times. Here's the other thing. There are squads that do a lot of tumbling, like mounting. Some leagues, like our league bylaws don't allow mounting in our league. What I mean by mounting is, holding the girls, holding each other up, building a pyramid, whatever, not allowed. Whereas some leagues allow that stuff. So sometimes rules prohibit it from being as athletic, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you look at the definition of sport, we just said physical exertion, physical skill. Let's face it, if you're a cheerleading group that does a lot of tumbling, a lot of gymnastics involved in what you do, I think you have to consider that a sport, don't you? And especially if you go to competitions. Now, let's face it, there probably are cheerleading squads that don't really compete. They're just there on Friday night and they support the team. They don't do a lot of, the gymnastics aspect. They don't really go to competitions. Can you make the argument that maybe that's more of a club or more of an activity? Maybe, I don't know. But it's always been interesting to me, because if you remember, there's even been people take it as far. You mentioned the collar of money, right? With like sports like billiards, bowling, golf, auto racing. You'll have these people that say, are those things sports? In my opinion, they definitely are. I mean, you're still using some level of physical skill. You take auto racing, and obviously the machine is doing the bulk of the work, right? But you look at those drivers when they get out of a car, man, they look like they've been through a battle, So you can't convince me that that's not a physically exerting sport. So, yeah, I mean, I think as you get into this, it definitely brings up the interesting point of just what actually is a sport.
I think what happens too, this is normal. It's no different than selecting a movie, no different than selecting a book, whatever it might be. You're going to be started to be brought in a little bit more by your likes and your dislikes, your interests. So when we talk these different sports throughout all the Olympic sports, I mean, there's a lot of just pretty good movies I've seen that you almost forget they're about sports, because maybe it's not your favorite, being a cutting edge about figure skating, or a Gabby Douglas story, or we've mentioned some of the other different things. I guess what I would ask you, Matt, is I start to put it into a category, do you find yourself able to separate, kind of the entertainment value compared to the seriousness, and sometimes how they kind of overlap? For an example, I think of a Blue Chips or the program in terms of a basketball, football thing, where there's a lot of entertainment involved, some great one-liners in there and so forth, but there's that hidden message or that theme of what it's like in college recruiting today, and the college life and so forth. So there's those types of things. I know a lot of times, like when I read, I prefer more of a kind of a nonfiction or more of a coaching type book, a little bit more of a serious read. Do you find yourself able to separate that here in these categories in terms of, hey, I'm just going to watch a movie to be completely entertained, compared to, man, this movie's very motivational, this movie's really kind of historic, and I'm really learning a lot about a story I didn't know? Kind of take me through that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just, I think a little bit of both for me is fine. I mean, there's times I just enjoy watching. We're going to get into some of our favorite sports movies later on, and you can make the argument that a couple of mine were more about humor and a storyline than it actually was that sport. The sport was just sort of the vehicle that they got this story across with, but yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I'm like you too. I do think there is it's fun sometimes from a historical standpoint to be able to go back and watch a movie and see, I mean, it's one thing to read about somebody or to watch a documentary. And I think we all know when we watch a movie based on a true story,
Right.
That there's some Hollywood,
Sure,
injection there. I mean, I'm sure when you watch the movie Ali, which was a great movie, it's not, there was some Hollywood in there. It's not just absolutely 100% an accurate depiction probably of every single thing that went down. Right. But some movies, about tragic sports moments, like a We Are Marshall or something like that. Again, probably
good movie.
100% accurate. I don't think anything Hollywood does is going to be necessarily 100% accurate, because there is going to be an entertainment value added to that, don't you think?
Sure. Well, there's no doubt, and I think, like when I think of some of those motivational movies that also kind of tell the story, I think a little bit, going back a little bit further, Rudy. I had a chance when I went to Buckeye Boys State. I worked for the HETUC, which was kind of a sports journalism there while I was at Buckeye Boys State. That was one of our featured speakers. I got a chance to meet Rudy. That was a really neat thing. And The Blind Side comes to mind, those types of movies. The historian in me, 8 Men Out. A lot of baseball people haven't seen that movie. I always joke maybe I like it because my favorite team, the Reds, it's one of their World Series. Unfortunately, the other team had to lose on purpose. So there's a lot of factors.
This year it looked like this year in the playoffs it looks like the Reds lost on purpose, but I don't want to get off on a tangent there.
You may not want to open that up. But no, I think there's a lot of those. I think there's a lot of those different movies, and I think of leadership, Matt. I can't help but think of certain scenes. Maybe not even my favorite sports sometimes. Like one of the great sport movies that's very motivational, has incredible leadership is Miracle.
Right.
When I think of Herb Brooks and I think of the locker room scene before they play, they're in the semifinal, and he's talking about the great opportunities and the great moments and how they're the greatest. Tonight we are the greatest hockey team in the world, and all those different things. That's a great scene. There's a lot of leadership in that, and you think about all the different things they went. So when you think of leadership and you think of motivational scenes, is there a particular movie you can share with us? That's one that came to my mind right off the bat for sure. That maybe, or I think of Jimmy in the Huddle, I'll make it. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those in Hoosiers, that type of thing. Is there one that jumps out at you maybe?
Yeah, wow. I mean, gosh, there's so many movies out there. I think you mentioned a couple movies right there that I do think there are some great leadership scenes in that were even different than the ones you mentioned. Like in the movie Miracle, I think my favorite scene in that movie is when he starts off, if you remember, at one of their first practices, asking the players, "What's your name and who do you play for?" Remember that?
Yes.
And the guys would say, whoever, University of Minnesota, University of Ball, all these different schools. And then when they played poorly in one of the prelims or whatever, if you remember the scene where he kept them on the ice and they were shutting the lights off, and he was just running them until they just
begging someone to quit. Yeah.
And he kept, and finally the thing that stopped it is when I think it was Michael Rizzioni
with the Massachusetts.
Yeah. Who do you play for? And he said USA. Right?
Yeah, great.
And basically that was what Herb Brooks was trying to get at, was we've got to get to a point where we don't play for our individual colleges anymore. If you remember, some of those guys were rivals in college; they didn't even like each other. We're not out there for ourselves. We're out there for actually this mission we're on. So I thought that was a cool leadership thing, and I think that's something
really good.
I mean, I think even it sounds cheesy, but if you're a coach, you can watch these movies and pick up on something sometimes. Like, hey, this makes sense. I mean, you're not going to sit there and do it as dramatically maybe as they do it in a movie, but you can see the movie Hoosiers. Another scene. Some of the scenes I liked at Hoosiers, I liked the scene where he basically fired his assistant coach. It wasn't even his assistant; it was just a guy who thought he was going to be the assistant. Remember that when he told him his coaching days were over. And then the funny thing about Hoosiers, Shane, and I don't know how many people have seen this, but I have the disc with all the deleted scenes, and there was a lot of scenes in Hoosiers that never made the movie. Like, do you remember the kid that got kicked off? This was a lot of people talk about this in Hoosiers. The kid that got kicked off early in the movie. Buddy? Yeah. I think that was, And all of a sudden, he just shows back up on the team.
Right,
Remember that?
right.
What? Well, there's actually a deleted scene where Coach Dale's out in this barn reading a book, just sitting like in a hayloft. And this kid comes to him and basically apologizes and asks to be back on the team. And in that scene, they talk about how, basically the coach uses it as a teachable moment about what we expect out of you, and it was probably a little bit boring of a scene to be put into the movie. And I'm sure they were trying to trim the fat. A lot of people don't know this, but the people that put out Hoosiers thought it was going to be a complete bust. It was going to be like one of the worst movies ever. So they basically just sort of, let's get this thing over with type of thing, and threw it out there. And then it became this huge hit. But if you watch that deleted scene, it was a great moment of a coach having some empathy, a little bit of empathy for a player. And but at the same time saying, I've got to hold you accountable. So
How about Jimmy walking into the town hall meeting to vote?
Oh yeah,
And saying,
that's got to be one of the greatest.
I don't know if it make any change, but I figure it's time I
Yeah.
start playing ball.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And the one guy stands up there, like, I knew as soon as we got rid of it, and then he hits him with the, you know.
Well, how about the lady saying, I think we should vote again? You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's always that little Hollywood flair on it, but no, those are some cool. Yeah, the funny thing about motivational movies too is some of them aren't even necessarily sports movies that are kind of cool in terms of motivation. Like Dead Poets Society was a movie that came in terms of leadership and motivation. Even things like movies that just sort of get you fired up a little bit, like A Few Good Men, or you know, the scenes toward the end where so I mean, there are movies. There are with Braveheart, Gladiator. You got these movies that have these scenes in them. Going real old school, Spartacus. Where everybody said, "I am Spartacus," right? In other words, you're not going to single out who this is. There's all these little scenes sometimes that aren't even sports movies that are kind of cool motivational scenes.
Where do you stand on the? It's got to be realistic. Like, for example, a movie that a lot of people don't know about, baseball, one of my favorite movies, like Little Big League, where the boy's a really intelligent baseball kid, about 13 years old. His grandpa owns the Twins. He passes away, and he had left him the team. Ends up managing them, things like that. Or there's certain movies I'll watch and it's just not very realistic, or it's different things. Or I'll hear some people say, well, Rocky's Rocky, but the boxing's not realistic. Where do you stand on the whole? It's got to be realistic to be a good sports movie.
Shane, I got to laughing when you said realistic, and then you mentioned Rocky. It reminded me of the Eddie Murphy stand-up. So realistic. With the when he described an Italian guy coming out of the movie theater after Rocky. But no, I again, there's that entertainment value that sometimes comes with just something different. I mean, I don't think Rookie of the Year or whatever, where the kid breaks his arm.
A great movie, yeah.
Very, very, very realistic. But
Henry, that was his name, right?
Oh yeah. See, I'm telling you, man, you're letting people know how much you watch these cheesy movies, man. I'm just going to be honest with you.
Well, let's just go down through sports, if that's okay. Like, and just see if we can at least put these into some categories. And I guess this goes into my pet peeve a little bit. I don't take myself too serious. I have some fun with sports movies in general. There's certain things I just think you cross a line. You know what I mean? Like, let's go to golf. Tin Cup, great movie. Okay. Right. But the ending is ridiculous. It's just stupid. Okay. So you're in the US Open. If you want to have a guy go for it, like on the fourth straight day and hit it in the water and lose or whatever, but he not only sits there on Sunday of the major and it tries to hit like 10 straight balls onto the green. He then gets down to his last ball and makes the shot. You know what I mean? Like we make it like realistic, like we're knocking in from 260 or whatever. So like
with his girlfriend over there yelling, just knock it on, Roy.
So always remember your 10 or whatever, 12 or 12. I think. Well, I don't know, but like, you know what I mean. But my point is like, I do think sometimes that's when it loses a little bit in terms of the thing. But again, I know that's probably a me problem in terms of entertainment. But golf. So throw the golf. I know I've thrown one out there. Give me some golf movies that jump out at you.
Another great line in Tin Cup was when he basically, I can't remember the line exactly, but where he said, "Have you ever parred out with a 7-iron?" Do you remember that?
It never occurred to me to try.
Never occurred to me to try. I mean, that was the perfect line of like, you're a complete head case, so that's the only reason you would think about parring out with a 7-iron. Well, I mean, Caddyshack has to be up there. Yeah. I think just in terms, again, a movie that's more for humor. I mean, is it a golf movie? Sure, but it's really just a comedy. And you ever notice, I mean, how bad the sequels are too? I mean, to some of these, like, I know as we get into some of these movies, they had sequels. Like there was a Caddyshack 2, and I didn't even remember that, and like it was awful. So from what I understand, I never watched it, but people say it was just absolutely
maybe
terrible.
In business you just feel like you owe it to yourself to try. You know what I mean? If you make that much money,
you have that much success on something, you may as well go for it again. No, so I would probably say, Caddyshack. There's been a lot of decent golf movies, like The Greatest Game Ever Played, Legend of Bagger Vance, whatever. But but I think a 10 Cup would probably be my personal favorite, although that's probably the generation. I mean, I think if you grew up just a little bit older than us, Caddyshack would probably be it for you.
Mm-hmm. I think that's fair. Now, I have, I guess, in other categories, I've mentioned some baseball. I mentioned 8 Men Out's a great movie, obviously. Field of Dreams. I think I mentioned Little Big League. You mentioned Rookie of the Year. There's so many out there. Baseball. Well, I mean, goodness, you have a poster there behind you. I assume Major League ranks right up there.
Yeah.
Let's go baseball here. Some of your favorites.
Well, Major League would always be my favorite baseball movie. Again, you can make the argument that that's not necessarily a baseball movie per se. It is kind of a comedy story behind it or whatever. You mentioned a couple I like. I think same could be said for Bull Durham. Is it a baseball movie? Well, it is in a way, but it's more of a story. Moneyball was, if you're looking for something that was more like that actually happened.
Right.
The story of Moneyball was, if you're a Major League Baseball fan today, and especially of a mid-market team, mid-market or a small market club, Moneyball is probably pretty interesting to you to watch. I'll tell you one that I think was a great movie is Sandlot. I know it's a kid's movie, but Sandlot was a great lines. Movie. I mean, unlike the cheesy movies you like Rookie of the Year, and no, Sandlot was. Now, I mean, I will admit, because my kids had this DVD, I've watched Sandlot about 100 times. But
I could probably guess your favorite line. You will give it to us, or by putting you on the spot?
Oh, you play ball like a girl.
Oh yeah, that's a classic line in there.
What made that line so great is he had said way worse things to him along the way, and all of a sudden he said, "You play ball like a girl," and even his own teammates were like, "Whoa, man, you just crossed the line. Like, you can't. Come on, man. You can't go there."
Well, there's are you crying? There's no crying in baseball.
I forgot about it.
There's all of those, and now, where do you stand on the love story? Well, we got to work the love story in there. Like a great baseball story is For Love of the Game, where Kevin Costner plays the perfect game, and we've got to throw in the love story there to where we can get like the husband wife on date night or whatever.
Well, that's what it is. You know what I mean? Like, the guys want to go watch this dude try to get a perfect game, and because it's a love story, hey, you can talk the wife into going with you. You know what I mean? It's hey, these guys, it's a marketing genius.
Now, you mentioned sequel. Major League had the Major League 2, which was still pretty good. The
Okay.
Back to the Minors. I probably should have left that one alone.
Yeah.
But and again, I'm sure we'll come back and we'll cross things over. I'm sure we're even missing some. Next here on my list, let's go basketball. I guess the only one we've mentioned, obviously, Hoosiers is I assume both of us in our top 5. Again, Blue Chips was okay. I love the story behind it and kind of the theme. Give me a couple there. I know I have a couple more on my list. Maybe I'll share some basketball ones that jump out at you beyond Hoosiers or anything like that.
I liked Glory Road. That was one that was a true story, obviously, of like first all black starting lineup.
Yes.
And of course they beat Kentucky, who was at the time kind of thought of as, obviously one of the powerhouses in college basketball, but a team that typically started all white players.
I like Pat Riley and those guys on that team. Right. Yeah.
Right. That was a good one. I know you liked Teen Wolf. I know that was one of your favorite. No, I don't know. Coach Carter was interesting. I remember watching that. I've only seen that one time. I don't know. Are there any other basketball ones you can think of?
Well, no, that's certainly one that he got game. Hoop Dreams. There were some great lines there in that documentary.
White Men Can't Jump.
White Men Can't Jump. That is obviously entertaining.
That was a good one.
There was a great line and I believe it was Hoop Dreams where they were asking, will you remember me if I make it big time? He was saying no, but I'll remember me if I don't, that type of thing. That was kind of a cool motivational line that's been really popular and throughout. So, yeah, I think those are all pretty cool. Let's continue to go down because we'll go bring this all together here in a little bit. Like football, maybe I mentioned the program earlier. The Longest Yard comes to mind. What jumps out at you in football?
You already mentioned Rudy. I enjoyed Remember the Titans.
Remember the Titans was phenomenal. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
what the two leaders think about this. What the two leaders had to come together and figured they finally figured out too that, like, hey, we can't do this without the other one. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
see,
they
that's one of those
together.
things we meant. Yeah, that's one of those things we mentioned early in the show, where some of these movies, you're watching it for the entertainment value, obviously, but there's things to be learned about the unselfishness of. It's funny, we talk about these movies. I don't want to. I know we've got more of the list to go down here, Shane,
Sure.
but like Mike Neighbors, the coach of Arkansas the women's basketball team at Arkansas. Remember, Mike Neighbors was the coach at University of Washington, when they had what was the girl's name that was the leading scorer of all time in women's basketball? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And they had a great team up there in Washington. And he took the Arkansas job because he was from Arkansas and graduated there. And it was his dream job, even though probably wasn't as good a job at the time. And he had a podcast called In the Neighborhood that I've listened to several times. And it's funny. He's watched, like, he's ranked every movie he's ever watched, okay, which thousands of movies he's watched. But my point to this is he uses movies like we just talked about with Remember the Titans and the unselfishness, aspect of that. He'll use movies for his team. He'll have his girls watch movie scenes to illustrate a point. So, in some of these movies, there are some actually tangible, usable things in leadership.
No doubt about it.
And I think Remember the Titans definitely, like you said, I mean, obviously the whole story of trying to integrate this school and this team and two Hall of Fame level coaches eventually. One already was and one was becoming one, right? And to be able to come together like that was a pretty neat, I think, study on personalities and trying to mix personalities and blend personalities and just have an unselfish approach. I
don't think there's any question. I know you've talked about some of the different podcasts. I believe that that girl's name you're thinking of is Plum, is her last name. I believe is Kelsey Plum.
Yes, that's it. That is. That's it. Yeah.
But yeah, phenomenal player. And I've heard you talk about that podcast and some of the different things. That's good stuff. And Blindside Matt comes to my mind on the football. Again, those stories when you think about what people come through and what they end up doing, and those are neat stories. Let's move on down the line here. Let me look at my list. Hockey, I mentioned Miracle. Is there another hockey movie that we're missing?
Nah, not really. I mean, Slapshot was a comedy back in the, I think, 70s or early 80s. I've only seen it once. I know a couple of my friends think it was great, but I've never seen it a lot. I mean, it was more, like I said, of a comedy type thing. If you ask my kids, they tell you the Mighty Ducks, but
Mighty Ducks.
And there ends up being about 4 of them too. I think you talk about sequels. There was a whole bunch of them.
Now speaking of sequels and unboxing, okay, now we have Rocky 2, 3, 4, 5. We have Rocky Balboa. Then we have Creed 2. I've seen every one of them. Not ashamed to admit it. Yeah. And they're phenomenal, you know what I mean? And I'll be honest, looking back on them, I don't know, that started like in 1976, I believe it was, all the way back to Rocky. And you go back and watch like Rocky 1 and 2 now, and you're like, there's a part of me for the longest time growing up that thought they got a little bit better as they went. I don't know if everyone would agree with that. I think it was a neat story, but again, there's certainly something about the motivation. And I think what's also neat about movies, Matt, is how they blend with culture. I mean, Rocky became a part of culture to where you almost felt like he was a real athlete, right?
Oh yeah. Well, and you talk about the motivation, right? And like, when you were a kid and the workout scenes would come on with the music, I mean, you'd be like, oh yeah, you're ready to go compete. You get fired up watching that stuff as a kid.
We thought we were going to get faster for basketball or whatever, by like chasing the chicken or whatever.
Oh yeah. Running through the snow like in Rocky 4. I mean, I can remember as a kid, you'll remember this, where you go to the video store and try to rent like all 3 or 4 of them, whatever many were out at the time, and have a marathon that night of VHS tapes at watching Rocky. But in terms of getting better as they go, I mean, to an extent, but Rocky 5 was the outlier to that. That movie was terrible. Rocky 5 was horrible. I thought Rocky 4 was great. And I actually think a couple of the most recent ones have been really good.
So you're not a big Tommy Gunn fan?
No, that's awful.
Where he's like, you knocking him down once you try knocking me down. Like,
yeah, I mean, come on, man. No, I mean, but I will say Rocky's one of those movies where usually the sequels get progressively worse, and I think probably a couple of these most recent ones have been some of their better ones too. So, yeah, I mean, you got to give that franchise or whatever you want to call it credit, man. I mean, like you said, what's it been now? Basically about a 40-year run or
76. And what's crazy about it is if you watch like Creed, and they're great movies.
Right.
The way they stage the boxing now, and so it's so modern. You know what I mean? They've brought in the ESPN and the commentator type things, and the way they stage the fights is different too. So I'm sure that has a lot to do when we say, you know, generations in terms of the way we watch movies and different things. And I think that has a lot to do with it. Well, Matt, here's where I kind of wanted to go with this, and you jump in there and throw in whatever you want. I was almost, I don't want to say shocked, but I was a little bit surprised when I went to narrow it down to my top 3, 4, 5 movies. If I were to look at my favorite sports, I certainly would probably have, you know, basketball, baseball there at the top.
All right.
I love golf, certainly love football. Now, as far as the covering sports and watching sports, I actually love volleyball. About 20 years ago, I started to learn the game of volleyball, so I never really played volleyball of any kind, but I'm fascinated by that. But outside of like the old Side Out movie or whatever, I don't even know if you ever heard of that. I don't even know if I've seen very many volleyball movies. But I guess what I was going to say is I started to look at some of my favorite sports movies, and if I put them into say like a top 5, I found myself with 2 or 3 maybe off the radar there a little bit. And that kind of goes back to letting you know that the movie. So I guess I was going to ask you, not even asking you to name them yet, but as you start to think of some of your favorite movies, do you find yourself more toward your favorite sports, or do you have some outliers that maybe draw you in for another reason?
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I mean, I look at my favorite movies, and as we get into these here at the end and talk about a couple of our favorites, probably 2 of my favorites are 2 of my favorite sports. But then there are some that, because the way I tried to do this is I thought to myself, if this movie's on TV at 11 o'clock at night and I'm sitting around doing nothing,
right?
Do I watch it or turn the channel, even though I've seen it 100 times? And some of the ones that fell into that category that I would sit there and watch it, you know, kind of along the lines of Die Hard. It's not a sports movie, but I can't tell if Die Hard's on, I'm watching Die Hard. You know what I'm saying? But like, so that was kind of my criteria for these sports movies. Would I watch it if it was on? And a couple of them are my favorite sports, but a couple of them, like you said, would fall into that category of, you know, sports that maybe I'm not into quite as much, but the movie itself was so good or so enjoyable that I'll watch it anyway.
Well, I tell you what, I'll kind of throw out some of mine on what I was talking about. You know, I think as I start to get into my top 5, and I have trouble maybe ranking them 1 through 5, but certainly in my top 5, I certainly would have the movie Miracle. There's something about that movie, and again, I think what I'm drawn into, even though I'm probably like Al Michaels was describing there in the pregame of the semifinal match. You know, there's a lot of people in the world that don't know the difference between a clothesline and a blue line. I probably fall into that. I can remember, I'm almost embarrassed to admit, I can remember one time, Matt, this is like the first 20 minutes of Sports Center. I mean, this has been like 25 years ago, okay? I've learned since. I missed like the first 25 minutes of Sports Center because I didn't know that they play 4 quarters in hockey. You know what I'm saying? So like, it was one of those things. So, but there's something about Miracle, and I think it goes beyond the whole hockey experience into when we sit on a podcast like this and we talk leadership and we talk about motivation and we talk about those different things, like when you know Michael Ruzioni is is able to speak up and understand what his coach had been working to get. And when you think of that speech that I referenced earlier, when he says, if we played them 10 times, they beat us 9, but not tonight.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Not tonight. Tonight we skate with them. Tonight we stay with them. Tonight we shut them down. Like I can almost recite that speech when he tells them tonight we are the greatest hockey team in the world, and he tells them every one of you are born to be hockey players. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's just one of those scenes that kind of draws you in, and it's just the whole thing, the coaching interview and the hiring process and the way he brought his assistant on. And again, hockey's not one of mine, but I would certainly bring it into the top 5. So Matt, I guess what I wanted to say is I get in the final thoughts and I'm doing this type of 5. Out of your top 5, are there any that would surprise us? And if not, that's fine. But do you see any of an outlier? Because again, I think it would surprise some people who know me to think that a hockey movie's in my top 5.
Well, I'll tell you what is probably going to surprise and maybe even offend you, Shayne, because this is going to open up a discussion that we just have to have because it's just too funny. One movie I really enjoy is Secretariat. Okay, the movie, we watched it the other night with my kids. It's a Disney movie or whatever, but it's pretty well done. And just recently, a few months back, I guess, I went to Louisville, Kentucky, and actually visited several places, one of which was Churchill Downs. And it was a cool experience. I mean, being there, seeing this place, how big it was. Well, of course, they talked a little bit about Secretariat and how he holds the track records at all these, the 3 Belmont, Churchill Downs, and the Preakness. And it's an interesting story. It's a great story, and it's actually a cool story. The movie gets into sort of how, it would have been easy for this lady to kind of give up on it and sell the farm altogether. A lot of interesting storylines on it. But it got me laughing because I remember, how angry you were. And I mean, rightfully so. This is ridiculous. But some people will remember when ESPN did its top, was it 100 athletes of the century or something like that?
Something like that. And they were going they 20 at a time, and we were really competitive. We were trying to predict them.
Oh yeah, we were trying to predict, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Secretariat comes in as and I've got it right here, 35th best athlete in the century, right behind Lou Gehrig. And just in front of Oscar Robertson. I can remember you saying how offended the Big O should be that he finished one spot behind.
Yeah.
And as I was looking that up to refresh my memory, on Wikipedia they had this thing that said there was some controversy when Secretariat was named one of the greatest athletes of all time. People said, one of the quotes was, "What's a 4-legged animal doing in this competition?" You know what I mean? I mean, it's just it was too much to pass up. So I'm watching this movie with my kids the other night, and I can't quit giggling thinking of you losing your mind 20 years ago when Secretariat came in just ahead of the Big O and greatest athletes of all time.
That certainly is a good one. I mean, as I continue to go, you have the motivational. I certainly have the historic. Matt, you mentioned earlier, and I think they almost kind of group together the idea behind 8 Men Out and Moneyball. And the whole money scheme and the contract thing all the way back to the beginning there, and then how it's impacted the game moving forward and how different people. It's funny that you mentioned Moneyball when we just had a show on analytics,
right? And
how that drives everything too. So I think those 2 baseball movies certainly go to the top. I have trouble picking one Rocky, but the idea of Rockies, to say that they're not my favorites in terms of how many times I've seen those. I think that kind of goes back to when we were growing up. I mean, remember, gosh, if I'm not mistaken, you and I went with family to watch like Rocky 4 on Christmas night, like when it came out. Like, I mean, it was one of those that it was those types of things. So I think the combination of and then obviously Hoosiers. So, I have Hoosiers in there. I have Rockies probably just as a whole sequel in there. And then, like I said, I love Miracle. The baseball movies, it would probably be between one of those two. I certainly, from an entertainment value, do love Major League. And then I have that personal connection that I always have to Rudy, where I had a chance to meet Rudy and interview him and some of those things. So that's probably in my top 5. So there's probably a mixture in there of things that, I really enjoy and so forth. So I guess in a final thought, Matt, I would say this, and then by all means, if you have other stuff, we'll still talk about it. But I guess my closing thought would be, understanding how books and movies and different motivational things sometimes just serve as great platforms in terms of, it works for some kids, it doesn't work for others, but a lot of times motivational quotes, every program has, I've heard you on the show rattle off a couple of your go-tos that are foundation pieces of your program.
Right.
I can remember a couple of my mentor coaches having different things, and I'm telling you, still to this day, 25, 30 years later, I can still hear some of those coaches, if it is to be, it's up to me. I can hear him saying that. Right. It's those types of things. There's no limit to what we can achieve if no one cares who gets the credit. I can just hear the coach rattling those off. The Hall of Fame coach Don Neff, is what I'm referring to there. So I guess that's what makes movies cool for me. I think of one-liners, and some are just stupid, and some are funny, right? Like if you could dodge a wrench, you could dodge a ball.
Oh,
you know what I'm saying? Like,
dodgeball, yeah.
But at the same time, that there's those serious ones too that seem to jump out at you as well. So I guess that's what I would say is try not to take movies too serious. Allow yourself to be entertained, but when you do come across one of those that are really meaningful, make sure that you take the time to really appreciate that and try to see how it applies to you, your craft, your coaching, your playing, your leadership is in business, whatever it might be. And I think it's a really fun way to kind of do some professional development.
Yeah, as I looked at my favorite one, Shayne, it's funny as you get older and you look at your favorite ones, they have a little bit to do with maybe what motivates you now as opposed to when you're younger. But as I look at my list of Hoosiers, I also had Miracle. I think it's a great movie, but I had Hoosiers and Remember the Titans. I think I like those movies now more for the coaching aspect of how these guys, all 3 of these are based on a true story. And as we know that, again, Hollywood puts a spin on them, right? But how these people sort of attacked their day-to-day approach to their team or whatever as a coach is interesting to me. Or like in We Are Marshall, and I didn't have this on one of my top 5, but how a guy came into such an awful situation and rallied those guys, that coaching staff and those kids to even have a football team, again. Right. And what that means to the history of that university now. So it's, and then, but I had some, like you said, some fun ones too. My favorite sports movie of all time is probably Major League. I'm not gonna lie. And that probably makes me like,
no, it's an entertaining movie. You talk about the one-liners and those.
That's the thing. My assistant coach and I, we always joke around about how, we quote that movie almost on a daily basis, right? A kid throws a one-handed pass off the wall, and you're like, "Hey, just a bit outside, tried the corner and missed," which obviously is a great line. Or this guy here is dead, so scratch him off the list, right? There's always
scratch him off.
Yeah, there's so many. Almost like every single thing in life that happens. That's our running joke. Like, there's nothing in life that can happen where you can't tie it to a line from Major League, so that's probably why that movie. I even have my Jobu rum shirt on. You can't see it because of the camera angle tonight, but so
very bad to drink Jobu's rum.
Yeah, very bad, right? Yeah, curveball, bats are afraid. Another great line, but
I have a lot of those kids. Yeah.
Yeah, the Reds had a lot of those guys. The bats were afraid there in the postseason. But But no, so I mean, I think, like you said, I think it's tonight was just more of a fun night. But yeah, but you can also, as a coach, just like I said with Coach Neighbors at Arkansas and how he has his kids watch clips of movies. There's things you can use. It's almost a fun way. I've never done it, but it could almost be a fun way to get a message across to your kids, like, hey, check out this scene from this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Because here's the interesting thing: the movies that you and I like, and we talk about tonight, you'd be surprised how many of your kids have never seen them.
Oh, no doubt about it. Right.
Like there was a couple years
ago. So
you
can use them, and it's new material to them.
Yeah. There was a couple years ago where we had a chance, but our schedule was full. We had an invite to go play a regular season game in the Hoosiers gym, the gym where Hoosiers was filmed in, which is actually in Knightsville, Indiana. All right. And the gym is still there. They play a big all-star game there every year. I'm talking all-star game with like NBA guys come in. I mean, it's the state's biggest all-star game. And we had an invite to go play a game in that gym. And I'm sitting there losing my mind thinking this would be awesome, right? I mean, but then when I asked my kids, like half of them hadn't seen Hoosiers. I was like, I almost start cutting guys off the team. I mean, I got half the guys haven't even seen Hoosiers. So you'd be surprised how many kids, you think, well, I've seen this movie a million times. Some of your kids have never even seen it, never even heard of it. That just shows you how old we're getting.
Well, it is. And, earlier when you were talking about how as you get older, you relate to the coaches and the different things. One that I totally left off that I don't know why it came to me there when is the rookie with Dennis Quaid, the story of Jim Morris, the left, and how he made it all the way to pitch for Tampa Bay.
I just watched that with my son like 2 nights ago, literally.
Yeah. I mean, think about it, how much you relate. You're a teacher, you're a coach, you're trying to make your field nicer. You don't have the money. You're trying to figure out different ways. And that's so relatable. And you're just, and you think about, okay, relationships and how he used his resources and how he motivated his kids. Yeah, I'll go try out. I mean, like those are fascinating stories. So again, I'm sure we're missing some. And that's why I say on the contact information I'll give out. Maybe we'll get feedback. Maybe we'll revisit this in one of our mop-up shows or some different things like that. Right. But before I do that, Matt, is there anything else on your notes? Any other movies, one-liners, movie quotes, different things you wanted to share?
Oh no, I mean we could probably do them all night. I just it's been a fun show. I mean it really is, and it's one of these shows. I said this to you before we even came on to record tonight. I was like, here's the thing. I know when this show's over, I'm going to be laying in bed tonight thinking, I forgot to mention that movie. It's one of those things where you can't remember them all. But what would be cool is if people that listen to this send us a message with some. Maybe Shayne at the beginning of next week, if we end up doing our mop-up episode next week with 3 or 4 different topics or whatever topic we get into, we could start off with some of the movies that our listeners send in to us this week, maybe, don't you think? And just
that'd be great. Maybe even get like their top 3, and then maybe the best movie we didn't mention on the show or something like that.
Right.
Because I would love to know what we've left out. Maybe that would be a great way. So.
And it'd be we'll spend the first 10 minutes just doing that if people want to send them in to us, and
Okay. Well, let me go ahead before we get out of here. I'll throw out some contact information. I'll try to get some things out on social media as well. You can list those on Twitter, Facebook. If you don't want to make them public, just message me. You can also email me at admin1@svcsportzone.com, and we can talk that way. I know a lot of people that listen to the show seem to get a hold of me through Facebook Messenger. Some of our local listeners even through text and so forth. I really enjoy just talking about the show and the feedback, because it really drives a lot of our stuff. So, well, Matt, on that point, we'll get out of here. It was a different show, but it was a fun show, and I look forward to hearing what the fans have to say. We'll revisit it next week, and don't forget, we're probably no more than a month away from our long anticipated basketball state of the game. I know it's going to be one of our biggest shows yet. I'm going to guess, Matt, that's going to fall somewhere around show 30, 31, somewhere in that ballpark is what I'm guessing. So I know you and I are continuing to work on some stuff for that, so we're excited about that. So again, if you're on YouTube, thank you for watching. Make sure you go and get us on your podcast app. So if you're not able to watch, you're still able to listen in your car, at work, or whatever. And if you're on the podcast app, check us out sometime on YouTube there, SVC Sports Zone Shayne. So on that note, we'll get on out of here. This will show 27, taking leadership to the big screen as we talked our favorite movies here on Expanding the Zone. Thanks, everyone.